On the afternoon of April 8, 1904, an English poet on his honeymoon sat down in a Cairo apartment and began writing a book he did not believe he was writing. He wrote for 1 hour. The next day at noon, he sat down again. And on the third day, the same. By the end, he had a short text of 3 chapters, dictated, he said, by a voice belonging to an entity called D.T. Iwas. The text declared that the Christian age was over, that a new aeon had begun, and that the man holding the pen, Aleister Crowley, was its prophet. For the next 43 years, he would build an entire spiritual system around those 3 hours. A system that still runs underneath modern Wicca, chaos magic, and most of Western occultism today. This is how he did it. To understand what happened in that Cairo apartment, you have to start in a small town in Warwickshire, England, almost 30 years earlier. Edward Alexander Crowley was born on October the 12th, 1875, in Royal Leamington Spa. His father was an heir to a brewing fortune who had given up the business to become a traveling preacher for one of the strictest Christian sects in Victorian England, the Plymouth Brethren. The Bible was the only book the young boy was permitted to read. Daily scripture readings happened after breakfast. Theater, secular literature, and most forms of entertainment were forbidden in the household. Then, on March 5, 1887, everything changed. Edward Crowley Sr. died of tongue cancer. His son was 11 years old. His mother, Emily, doubled down on the faith. The boy, who had once preached alongside his father, began to push back. He pointed out contradictions in the Bible to his religious teachers. He read everything his mother told him not to read. Emily reached for the worst insult she could think of. She started calling him the Beast from the Book of Revelation. He took the name, and he kept it for the next 60 years. In 1895, he enrolled at Trinity College, Cambridge, and adopted the Gaelic form of his name, Aleister. He studied philosophy, played chess obsessively, climbed mountains in the Alps, and began publishing poetry. In December 1896, on a holiday in Stockholm, he had what he later called his first significant mystical experience. He left Cambridge in 1898 without taking a degree. He had inherited enough from his father to live on, and a question that had begun to consume him. If Christianity was wrong, what was right? Most people know him as the Beast, 666. Most of what they know is wrong. Aleister Crowley spent 43 years doing something nobody had attempted before. He took the ceremonial magic of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, the yoga and meditation practices he learned from teachers in India and Ceylon, the Kabbalah of medieval Jewish mystics, the Egyptian theology of the pyramid texts, and the inner doctrines of a German occult order called the Ordo Templi Orientis. And he tried to fuse all of it into a single, working spiritual technology. He called it Magick with a K. He defined it as the science and art of causing change to occur in conformity with will. He believed it was the operating system of the next 1,000 years. And whether you take it seriously or not, the system he built became the blueprint for almost every Western occult movement that followed. To get there, he had to start by joining the most important secret society in Western occult history. In August 1998, in a hotel in Zermatt, Switzerland, Crowley met a chemist named Julian Baker. They got talking about alchemy, about ceremonial magic, about the secret traditions running underneath the surface of European culture. Baker introduced him to the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. Founded in London in 1888, the Golden Dawn synthesized the medieval Hermetic tradition, Jewish Kabbalah, Egyptian mythology, tarot, astrology, and ceremonial magic into a structured initiatory system. Its members included some of the most prominent literary figures of the era. The poet William Butler Yeats, the novelist Arthur Machen, Maud Gonne, Constance Wilde, the wife of Oscar Wilde. On November 18, 1998, Aleister Crowley was initiated into the order. He was 23 years old, and he climbed through the grades faster than almost anyone before him. But within 2 years, the Golden Dawn was tearing itself apart. Yates and Crowley despised each other. The order's leader, Samuel Liddell MacGregor Mathers, was excommunicated by his own members. By 1903, Crowley had walked away. But he kept everything they had taught him: the grades, the rituals, the Kabbalistic framework, the pentagram and hexagram banishings. He had a complete system of Western ceremonial magic in his head. Between 1900 and 1903, he traveled Mexico, Hong Kong, Ceylon, which is now Sri Lanka, India, Burma. He studied yoga with a teacher named Alan Bennett, who had been in the Golden Dawn and had become a Buddhist monk. He learned breath control, meditation, the classical postures. He came back to Europe with something almost no Western occultist of his generation had: a direct embodied experience of Eastern mystical practice fused with the most advanced Western ceremonial magic of the era. In 1903, he married Rose Edith Kelly, and in early 1904, the two of them went on honeymoon to Egypt. In March 1904, Aleister and Rose were renting an apartment near the center of Cairo. He was performing minor invocations, mostly to amuse himself and impress his new wife. But Rose, who had no prior interest in occultism, began entering trance states. She kept repeating the same phrase, "They are waiting for you." He pressed her for details. On March 18th, she told him the entity behind the messages was Horus, the falcon-headed god of ancient Egypt. On March 20th, she announced that the equinox of the gods had come. A new age was beginning. She led him to the Bulak Museum, walked him past dozens of exhibits, and stopped in front of a 7th century BCE funerary stele. Crowley looked at the museum's catalog number. The exhibit was numbered 666. He named the artifact the Stele of Revealing. On April 8th, 9th, and 10th, between noon and 1 in the afternoon each day, he sat at a desk in the apartment and transcribed a text. He said he heard a clear, masculine, disembodied voice behind his left shoulder. The voice introduced itself as Awas, the minister of Hur-Par-Krat, an aspect of Horus. The text was 3 chapters long. He titled it Liber el vel legis, the Book of the Law. The book made 3 claims that would define the rest of his life. First, that the Aeon of Osiris, the patriarchal sacrificial age represented by Christianity and the dying and resurrecting God, was over. Second, that the Aeon of Horus, the age of the crowned and conquering child, of individual sovereignty and direct gnosis, had now begun. And third, that the central law of this new Aeon was the phrase that would become the most quoted and most misunderstood sentence in modern occultism: "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." He himself was the prophet. He did not know what to do with it at first. For 5 years he barely mentioned the Book of the Law. He kept climbing mountains, including a disastrous 1905 expedition to Kanchenjunga that killed 4 members of his team. He kept publishing poetry, but by 1909, something had shifted. He founded his own magical order, called the 8.8, the Silver Star. He started publishing a periodical called the Equinox, where he printed his rituals and the secret instructions of the Golden Dawn that he had sworn never to reveal. Around 1910, the head of the Ordo Templi Orientis, a German occult organization with its own inner mystical doctrine, contacted him. They believed Crowley had independently discovered their highest secret. They invited him in. By the early 1920s, Crowley had taken over the British branch of the OTO. He had folded his thelemic system into theirs. He had a religion. He had an order. He had thousands of pages of ritual and theory. The only thing he did not have was a temple. So in 1920, he went to Sicily and built one. He chose Cefalù, a small fishing town on the northern coast. After consulting the I Ching, he rented a modest white villa on a hillside outside the town. He named it the Abbey of Thelema, after a Rabelais novel, where the abbey is an anti-monastery whose inhabitants live by one rule: do what thou wilt. He arrived in March 1920 with a small group of followers. He intended the abbey to be a global headquarters for Thelema, a college of magic. Inside, he hand-painted the walls of his bedroom with frescoes he called the Chambre de Cauchemars, the Room of Nightmares. They depicted Thelemic deities and scenes of mystical transformation. The room was used for ritual initiations. 3 years later, it was over. In November 1922, a young Oxford graduate named Raoul Loveday arrived at the abbey with his wife Betty May. Loveday was 23 years old. He had taken first-class honors in history. He had become a devoted Thelemite. He took the magical name Frater Odd and threw himself into the work. In February 1923, Loveday drank from a contaminated mountain spring near the abbey, despite Crowley's explicit warnings. He developed acute enteric fever, a form of typhoid, and died on February 16th. His widow, Betty May, returned to London and gave an interview to the Sunday Express. The story exploded across the British press. The tabloid John Bull called Crowley the wickedest man in the world. Mussolini, who had taken power in Italy 4 months earlier, signed a deportation order in April 1923. The Abbey of Thelema closed. The villagers of Cefalù whitewashed over the murals. The villa was abandoned. It still stands today, half collapsed, on a hillside outside the town. The next 24 years were a long, slow descent. Crowley moved between Tunis, Paris, and London. His inheritance was gone. He had been prescribed morphine years earlier for asthma and had developed a serious dependency. In 1934, he sued a writer for libel and lost. The trial bankrupted him. But even broken, he kept working. In 1929, he had published Magick in Theory and Practice, the most complete statement of his system ever written. In the late 1930s, working with the artist Lady Frida Harris, he designed a new tarot deck called the Thoth Tarot, which embedded his Thelemic theology into 78 cards. The deck remains one of the most widely used tarot systems in the world. In 1945, he moved into a boarding house in Hastings called Netherwood. On December 1st, 1947, he died of myocardial degeneration aggravated by chronic bronchitis. He was 72. He was cremated in Brighton on December 5th. At the service, his hymn to Pan and selected passages from the Book of the Law were read aloud. The local council was so disturbed that they passed a resolution to ensure no such service would happen again. Aleister Crowley died convinced he had failed. He had not converted the world. The OTO was scattered. His followers were few. And then something strange happened. In the 1950s, an English civil servant named Gerald Gardner began publishing books about a religion he called Wicca. Gardner had known Crowley. He had been initiated into the OTO. The structure of Wiccan ritual, the magical circle, the casting of the pentagram, the calling of the quarters, all of it borrowed directly from Crowley's published versions of Golden Dawn ceremonies. In California, in the 1940s, a rocket engineer named Jack Parsons led a Thelemic lodge called the Agape Lodge. One of his closest collaborators was a science fiction writer named L. Ron Hubbard. Hubbard performed Thelemic rituals with Parsons before parting ways and founding what became Scientology. In the 1960s, Crowley's face appeared on the cover of the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin bought Crowley's Scottish estate, Boleskine House. The filmmaker Kenneth Anger built his entire artistic career around Thelemic symbolism. In the 1970s, a new generation of occultists in England developed something they called chaos magic. They treated Crowley's writings as foundational. Even Anton LaVey, founder of the Church of Satan, borrowed Crowley's vocabulary and ritual structure when constructing his own system. The man who died alone in a Hastings boarding house, who believed he had failed, became, within 30 years of his death, the single most influential figure in 20th century Western occultism. The scholar Henrik Bogdan calls him a central reference point for almost every contemporary new magical movement. What he had built in Cairo, in the Abbey of Thelema, in the pages of the Book of the Law and Magick, in theory and practice, did not die with him. It became the operating system of modern occultism. Whether you believe a non-human intelligence dictated the Book of the Law in April 1904, or whether you believe Aleister Crowley wrote it himself in a state of profound dissociation, the historical fact is the same. He spent his life trying to construct a complete spiritual technology for the modern age. He drew on every tradition he could find. He synthesized them into a system that practitioners still use today. He called himself the Beast. The press called him the wickedest man in the world. But the most accurate title belongs to the scholars who study him now. The father of modern occultism and magic. If you want to understand where Western esoteric practice actually came from, where modern Wicca, Thelema, and the entire post-war occult revival have their roots, you have to go back to that apartment in Cairo. To 3 days in April 1904. To a man who heard a voice and wrote down a book. If you found this useful, subscribe. There is more in this series, including deep dives into the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn and the strange afterlife of Thelema in the 21st century. The next one is on screen now. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law.